If you thought the criticism around Caitlin Clark had finally cooled off, think again. Just 2 minutes ago, Rich Eisen lit up the sports world with a response so sharp, so direct, and so unapologetic that it instantly shifted the entire conversation. And he didn't just defend her, he dismantled every argument from those claiming she's disrespectful to basketball. The debate has been building for months. Ever since Clark's meteoric rise from college stardom to the pros, critics have questioned her swagger, her deep logo threes, her on-court celebrations, and even the attention she's brought to the league. Some say she shoots too much. Others say she plays with too much confidence. And a loud minority has gone even further, suggesting that her style somehow disrespects the purity of the game. But Eisen wasn't having it. On his show, he addressed the narrative head-on, and what happened next was nothing short of a verbal takedown. He pointed out the obvious: basketball has always evolved. From flashy passes to long-range shooting, from bold personalities to high-scoring performances, the game grows because of players willing to push boundaries. So why, Eisen asked, is it suddenly a problem when Caitlin Clark does it? He didn't just defend her talent. He defended her impact. Attendance is up. TV ratings are up. Conversations around women's basketball are louder than ever. And Clark is a massive reason why. According to Eisen, calling that disrespectful isn't just wrong, it's backwards. He challenged critics to explain exactly what rule she's breaking. Is it illegal to shoot from 30 feet? Is confidence now a violation? Or is the real issue that she refuses to shrink herself to make others comfortable? Eisen's tone made one thing clear: the outrage says more about the critics than it does about Clark. But here's what made his comments hit even harder: he connected it to history. Every transformative athlete faces resistance. Every game changer gets labeled too much before they are celebrated as pioneers. Eisen essentially argued that we're watching that cycle play out in real time. And now the sports world is reacting. Fans are applauding Eisen for saying what many have been thinking. Others are doubling down. The debate isn't dying, it's exploding. So is Caitlin Clark truly disrespecting basketball? Or is she redefining it? And why does confidence in a young star make some people so uncomfortable? Rich Eisen made his stance crystal clear. The only question now is, whose side are you on? The moment Rich Eisen finished his opening remarks, you could feel the temperature shift across the sports world. This wasn't a casual defense. This wasn't a soft, let's all get along segment meant to calm tensions. It was a direct, methodical dismantling of the narrative that Caitlin Clark is somehow disrespectful to basketball. And in part one of this unfolding firestorm, it's important to understand exactly how we got here. The criticism didn't appear overnight. From the moment Clark stepped onto the national stage during her historic college run, she became one of the most polarizing figures in modern basketball. Her logo threes, no-look passes, fiery celebrations, and unapologetic confidence instantly drew comparisons to some of the boldest stars the game has ever seen. But while male athletes have long been celebrated for that kind of swagger, Clark's style has been dissected under a different microscope. Every deep shot became showboating. Every celebration became taunting. Every confident stare turned into a debate about sportsmanship. As she transitioned into the professional ranks, the scrutiny intensified. The spotlight grew brighter. Packed arenas, record-breaking television ratings, and non-stop media coverage followed her every move. For many fans, it was exciting. Women's basketball was finally commanding national attention at a historic level. But for critics, the sudden surge in popularity sparked discomfort. Instead of celebrating the growth of the game, some voices began framing Clark as the problem, suggesting that her style of play disrupted tradition. That's the backdrop against which Rich Eisen delivered his now viral remarks. He started by addressing the core accusation head-on: disrespectful to basketball. Eisen paused on that phrase, almost incredulous. What does that even mean? Basketball, he argued, is a living, evolving sport. It has never stayed the same. From the introduction of the shot clock to the explosion of the three-point line, from fast breaks to positionless basketball, innovation has always been part of the game's DNA. Players who stretch boundaries aren't disrespecting the sport, they are advancing it. Eisen then zeroed in on Clark's shooting range, one of the main sources of criticism. Some argue that pulling up from 30 feet early in the shot clock is reckless. But Eisen flipped the perspective. If she can make that shot consistently, how is it reckless? Isn't it simply skill? He pointed out that when long-range shooting revolutionized the NBA, it was initially met with skepticism too. Now it's foundational. The idea that Clark's deep shooting somehow violates basketball's unwritten code didn't hold up under scrutiny. But Eisen didn't stop at strategy. He addressed the cultural layer of the debate. Why is visible confidence so threatening? Why does emotion get reframed as arrogance when it comes from certain players? Clark's competitive fire, her intensity, her willingness to talk, her refusal to back down, has been labeled everything from cocky to disrespectful. Yet Eisen argued that those very qualities are what fans claim they want in sports: authenticity, passion, edge. The numbers back up her impact. Arenas selling out, viewership surging, merchandise flying off shelves, conversations about women's basketball dominating mainstream sports talk. Eisen emphasized that this isn't accidental. Clark isn't riding a wave, she is the wave. And to accuse the catalyst of disrespecting the very game she's elevating felt, in Eisen's words, deeply ironic. What made his defense particularly powerful was its tone. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't ranting. He was methodical, calm, almost surgical in the way he peeled back each argument. He challenged critics to articulate specific examples of actual disrespect. Not vibes, not feelings, not discomfort with change. Concrete violations of the game's integrity. The silence that followed that rhetorical question spoke volumes. At its core, part one of this debate isn't really about one player's shot selection or celebrations. It's about control over narrative. Who gets to define what basketball should look like? Who decides which styles are acceptable and which cross the line? Eisen made it clear, innovation doesn't require permission. And perhaps most importantly, he framed Clark's story within a broader historical pattern. Every transformative athlete faces resistance. The unfamiliar often feels threatening before it becomes iconic. Eisen suggested we may be witnessing that exact cycle, the tension that precedes acceptance. As the clip spread across social media, reactions poured in. Supporters applauded Eisen for articulating what they felt but hadn't fully expressed. Critics doubled down, insisting that fundamentals and tradition matter more than spectacle. The conversation only intensified. But one thing became undeniable. This wasn't a fringe debate anymore. It had moved to center stage. And thanks to Rich Eisen's forceful defense, the question had shifted. It was no longer, is Caitlin Clark disrespectful? It was, why does her style make some people so uncomfortable? And that question is just the beginning. As the fallout from Rich Eisen's comments continued to ripple through the sports world, part two of this debate became less about a single soundbite and more about the deeper tension underneath it. Because once you strip away the headlines and hot takes, what's really being argued isn't just whether Caitlin Clark shoots from too far or celebrates too loudly. It's about who gets to define respect in a changing era of basketball. Social media exploded almost instantly after Eisen's segment aired. Clips of his remarks circulated with captions like, "Finally someone said it, and this needed to be addressed." Supporters praised his composure and clarity, calling it one of the most articulate defenses of Clark to date. But the opposition didn't disappear. In fact, some critics became even more vocal, arguing that Eisen was oversimplifying a complicated issue. Their argument? That the game has unwritten rules. That there's a code. That certain gestures, certain shot choices, certain reactions can be seen as disrespectful to opponents, even if they are technically within the rules. But here's where the debate gets interesting. Those unwritten rules have always been fluid. Basketball culture shifts with each generation. What was once considered flashy becomes normal. What was once controversial becomes expected. There was a time when pulling up for a three-pointer in transition was frowned upon. Now it's celebrated as confidence and spacing awareness. There was a time when emotional celebrations were labeled unsportsmanlike. Now highlight reels are built around them. Eisen subtly leaned into that historical pattern without naming specific examples. His point wasn't to compare Clark to anyone else directly. It was to show that resistance to change is predictable. It's almost automatic. When someone bends the visual expectations of the game, even if they aren't breaking any rules, discomfort follows. And Clark undeniably bends expectations. She stretches defensive coverage the moment she crosses half court. She shoots with audacity. She gestures after big plays. She carries herself like someone who expects to dominate. For fans who grew up watching methodical half-court sets and reserved post-game interviews, that can feel jarring. But for younger viewers raised in an era of pace, space, and personality, it feels natural. That generational split is fueling much of this tension. Another layer that Eisen indirectly addressed is visibility. Clark's games are under a microscope. Every expression, every reaction, every sideline moment is clipped and shared. With increased attention comes increased scrutiny. The more eyeballs on a player, the more narratives attach themselves to every move.
And the numbers are impossible to ignore.
Women's basketball has experienced unprecedented spikes in viewership and attendance during Clark's rise. Games that once flew under the mainstream radar are now leading sports segments.
Jerseys are selling at record pace.
Conversations about the women's game are crossing into audiences that previously paid little attention. Eisen framed this not as coincidence, but as impact. Calling that impact disrespectful, he implied, misses the bigger picture. If the sport is reaching more people than ever, how can the catalyst be framed as harmful to it?
That's where his argument landed with force.
Still, critics argue that growth doesn't excuse behavior they perceive as excessive. They say there's a difference between confidence and arrogance, between passion and provocation. And this is where perception becomes subjective. What one fan sees as competitive fire, another sees as showboating. What one viewer calls intensity, another calls unnecessary theatrics. The line isn't universally agreed upon, and that ambiguity fuels endless debate. But Eisen's core challenge remains unanswered. What specific act crosses into disrespect? Shooting deep threes?
That's skill. Celebrating big shots? That's emotion. Talking competitively? That's part of sports. None of those violate the rulebook.
None undermine the integrity of the game. So if the criticism isn't about rules, what is it about?
Part of it may be comfort.
Clark represents change at a rapid pace. She represents attention, spotlight, and a style that forces adaptation.
Defenses must adjust.
Media must adjust. Even fans must adjust their expectations of what women's basketball can look like on the biggest stage. Change is rarely embraced without friction. Eisen's delivery in Part 1 sparked the fire.
But Part 2 reveals the deeper stakes.
This debate isn't fading because it taps into identity, how people see the sport, what traditions they value, and how much evolution they are willing to accept. And as more analysts weigh in, one thing is clear. The conversation is no longer confined to sports talk radio. It's cultural. It's generational.
It's philosophical. Is respect about staying within tradition? Or is it about honoring the competitive spirit by pushing boundaries?
Is basketball a static template? Or is it a canvas that expands with every new star? Caitlin Clark continues to play her game regardless of the noise. Rich Eisen continues to stand firmly in his defense.
And the audience remains divided.
But if there's one undeniable truth emerging from this clash, it's this. The louder the criticism becomes, the clearer Clark's influence appears. And we're only halfway through this storm. By the time Part 3 of this debate took shape, it was clear that what started as a commentary segment from Rich Eisen had evolved into something much bigger. This wasn't just about defending Caitlin Clark anymore. It was about redefining what dominance, confidence, and transformation look like in modern basketball, and who gets to be comfortable with it. As more analysts and former players weighed in, the conversation began splitting into two distinct camps. On one side were those echoing Eisen's stance: Clark isn't disrespecting the game, she's expanding it. On the other side were voices insisting that something about her approach feels different, even unsettling. But when pressed to explain exactly why, the arguments often became vague. That vagueness matters. Because when criticism lacks specificity, it usually points to something deeper than surface-level behavior. No one has been able to cite a rule she's broken. No official complaints from referees. No suspensions for unsportsmanlike conduct beyond the normal technical fouls that come with competitive intensity, something nearly every high-usage star accumulates. So if the structure of the game isn't being violated, then what exactly is the issue? Part of the answer lies in visibility and acceleration. Clark didn't slowly build into stardom over years in the pros. She entered with an avalanche of attention. Massive ratings followed her from college into the professional ranks. Arena attendance spiked wherever she played. Media coverage intensified overnight. For some longtime observers of the women's game, that rapid shift created tension. Not because growth is unwelcome, but because sudden spotlight redistribution can feel disruptive. Eisen subtly touched on this dynamic when he pointed out that growth in viewership benefits everyone. The rising tide argument is simple. When more eyes are on the league, more opportunities follow. Sponsorships, investment, larger platforms for other players. But critics argue that media focus has been too concentrated, creating imbalance. Here's the nuance. Increased attention toward a transformative star doesn't inherently diminish others. Historically, leagues have often surged because of a single magnetic figure. That doesn't erase the talent around them, it amplifies the ecosystem. Clark's style intensifies that amplification. She plays fast. She shoots from distances that stretch defensive schemes beyond comfort.
She celebrates with emotion. She talks on the floor. She demands the ball. Those traits aren't new to basketball, but they are bold in their presentation. And boldness, especially when paired with massive visibility, becomes polarizing. Eisen's defense becomes even more pointed in this context. He didn't just argue that Clark is skilled. He argued that labeling her style as disrespectful is a resistance reflex. The sport evolves. The spotlight shifts. The personalities grow louder. And every era initially resists its next wave. There's also a competitive layer that's often overlooked. When a player enters with high expectations and massive media attention, opponents elevate their intensity. Games become more physical. Emotions run higher. Every matchup feels charged. That intensity can create moments, stays, words exchanged, hard fouls, that feed narratives. But those moments are byproducts of competition, not proof of disrespect. And here's where Eisen's tone continues to resonate. He framed Clark's passion as commitment, not arrogance. Competitive fire has always walked a thin line. The same behavior can be praised or condemned depending on context and perception. A fist pump can be seen as motivation or mockery. A confident shrug can be viewed as entertainment or ego. Interpretation is subjective and often influenced by expectation. Clark's expectations were astronomical before she even stepped onto a professional court. With that level of anticipation comes amplified reaction. Every success is magnified. Every misstep is dissected. And every emotional moment becomes headline material. But Part 3 reveals something else entirely. The discomfort may not be about basketball mechanics at all. It may be about narrative control. When a new star captures public imagination so quickly, traditional storytelling shifts. Established hierarchies feel pressure. Media cycles adapt. Conversations change tone. And not everyone welcomes that pace of transformation. Eisen's commentary didn't attack critics personally. It challenged their premise. If respect for basketball means honoring competition, pushing limits, and drawing fans into the game, then Clark checks every box. If respect means playing within tradition without disrupting comfort zones, then perhaps the definition itself needs updating. Because basketball has never been static. It has moved from ground-bound fundamentals to above-the-rim artistry, from mid-range precision to long-range volume, from quiet professionalism to expressive individuality. Each evolution initially faced skepticism. Clark represents another chapter in that evolution. The louder the debate becomes, the clearer one truth emerges. Transformative athletes rarely receive universal approval in real time. Appreciation often arrives after the shock of change fades. Eisen appears to recognize that cycle, and he chose his side early. As the sports world continues to argue, one thing is undeniable. Caitlin Clark is forcing a conversation that extends far beyond her stat line. She's challenging assumptions about style, confidence, and growth in women's basketball. And whether critics approve or not, the game is responding. Part 3 doesn't close the argument. It intensifies it. Because the real question now isn't whether she respects basketball. It's whether basketball is ready for what she represents. By the time Part 4 of this conversation unfolds, something important has shifted. The debate is no longer reactive, it's reflective. After Rich Eisen forcefully defended Caitlin Clark, the discussion moved beyond highlight clips and emotional reactions. It started digging into legacy, evolution, and the psychology of fandom itself. One undeniable reality sits at the center of this storm. Clark is not playing small. She is not adjusting her range, muting her celebrations, or softening her edge to quiet critics. If anything, the scrutiny seems to sharpen her focus. That refusal to shrink may be the most disruptive element of all. Because in sports, especially at transitional moments, there is often subtle pressure placed on rising stars to assimilate rather than transform. To earn their place quietly. To prove themselves before demanding attention. But Clark arrived with attention already attached. Record-breaking viewership from her college career flowed straight into the pros. Cameras followed her. Arenas filled. Conversations expanded beyond traditional audiences. That scale of spotlight changes the ecosystem. Some longtime observers argue that the attention should be more evenly distributed. Others believe that Clark's popularity risks overshadowing equally elite talent across the league. Those concerns aren't inherently malicious, they reflect a desire for balance. But here's the tension. Visibility doesn't operate on a quota system. It follows energy. It follows engagement. And right now, Clark generates both at extraordinary levels. Eisen's commentary indirectly addressed that discomfort. He didn't dismiss the greatness of other players.
Instead, he framed Clark's rise as additive rather than subtractive. Growth in audience, he suggested, benefits the entire structure.
More viewers mean more investment.
More investment means broader opportunities. That's how professional sports ecosystems expand.
But expansion is rarely seamless.
With every generational shift comes friction between preservation and progress. Traditionalists worry about fundamentals, etiquette, and the right way to carry oneself. Progressives celebrate flair, personality, and evolution.
Clark sits at the intersection of those forces.
Her deep-range shooting isn't random, it's calculated. It forces defenses to stretch in ways they historically haven't needed to. That changes spacing.
That changes tempo.
That changes strategy. Innovation at that level naturally disrupts comfort zones. Then there's the emotional component. Clark's competitive fire is visible.
She reacts to big plays. She communicates with teammates.
She shows frustration.
She shows joy.
In a hypervisible era where every micro-expression becomes a viral clip, emotion can be reframed instantly depending on the viewer's lens.
Supporters see authenticity.
Critics sometimes see excess.
But emotion has always been part of elite competition.
The difference now is scale. Social media compresses context. A 2-second celebration clip can circulate without the preceding build-up or the competitive stakes that fueled it. Narratives form quickly. Labels stick fast. And once the word disrespectful enters the discourse, it spreads faster than nuance. What makes Eisen's defense resonate in this phase of the debate is that he reframed the word entirely. Disrespect implies harm to the integrity of the game. It suggests undermining its principles. But Clark's style doesn't weaken basketball. It intensifies it.
She forces opponents to adapt.
She forces analysts to recalibrate expectations.
She forces fans to reconsider what women's basketball can look like on a national stage.
That's not erosion. That's expansion. There's also a broader cultural layer at play. Modern sports reward personality. Leagues market individuality.
Fans connect with authenticity.
Yet when that authenticity challenges traditional norms, tension appears. Clark isn't manufacturing controversy.
She's playing freely within her skill set.
The controversy emerges from reaction.
And reaction reveals values.
Some fans value restraint and composure above all else. Others value flair and emotional transparency. Neither preference is inherently wrong. But labeling one style as disrespectful while celebrating similar traits in other contexts exposes inconsistency. Eisen's commentary didn't accuse critics of bad faith. It simply asked them to define their standard clearly and apply it evenly. Part 4 also reveals something subtle but powerful. The debate itself proves Clark's impact. Indifference is the true measure of insignificance. No one argues this intensely about players who don't matter. The volume of discussion, supportive and critical alike, signals transformation underway. Meanwhile, Clark continues to produce.
Continued scoring bursts.
Continued deep threes.
Continued intensity. She doesn't appear preoccupied with the noise.
And that steadiness may ultimately quiet the narrative more effectively than any televised defense.
But for now, the conversation remains loud. Because this isn't just about one athlete.
It's about generational transition. It's about how quickly audiences are willing to embrace change. It's about whether innovation must wait for approval. Rich Eisen chose clarity over caution. He positioned himself firmly in support of evolution. And in doing so, he forced the broader sports world to confront a central question. Is discomfort with change the same thing as disrespect? Part 4 leaves that question hanging, not because it lacks an answer, but because the answer depends on perspective.
And perspectives are still colliding in real time.
By the time we reach Part 5, the debate sparked by Rich Eisen has moved beyond a viral clip and into something far more defining. What started as a pointed defense of Caitlin Clark has evolved into a referendum on how we measure respect, progress, and power in modern basketball. And at this stage, the conversation isn't cooling down. It's crystallizing. Because here's the reality. Clark isn't changing.
The spotlight isn't dimming. The ratings aren't dipping. The arenas aren't emptying.
If anything, the momentum continues to build. That alone challenges the core criticism. If a player were truly damaging the integrity of the sport, you'd expect decline, fractured locker rooms, disengaged audiences, visible instability. Instead, the opposite is happening.
Engagement is surging. Visibility is expanding. Investment conversations are intensifying.
Rich Eisen's defense now looks less like a hot take and more like a forecast. What he recognized early, And what critics may now be confronting is that basketball is not weakened by bold personalities.
It is sharpened by them.
Clark's presence forces higher defensive intensity.
It demands strategic adjustments.
It elevates media scrutiny. It invites new fans into the ecosystem. That ripple effect doesn't shrink the game.
It stretches it.
And yet, resistance persists. Part of that resistance may stem from nostalgia. Every generation tends to romanticize its version of the game.
Fundamentals are remembered as purer.
Competition is remembered as grittier.
Celebration is remembered as subtler.
But history rarely supports that tidy narrative. Every era had its disruptors. Every era had its critics. And nearly every transformative athlete was labeled too much before being embraced as essential. Clark's situation fits that pattern almost perfectly.
She is unapologetic about her range.
She doesn't hesitate to take high-difficulty shots if they are within her skill set.
She celebrates big moments.
She competes vocally. She commands attention without asking for permission. None of those traits violate basketball's structure. But they do challenge expectations, particularly in a league navigating rapid growth and heightened visibility. What makes this chapter compelling is that Clark isn't responding verbally to every criticism.
She's responding through performance.
And performance, over time, carries more weight than commentary. Eisen's words ignited the spark, but the ongoing games fuel the fire.
Another dimension now emerging is peer response.
As more players speak carefully, some supportive, some measured, it's clear that the league itself understands the complexity of this moment. Growth is exhilarating, but it's also delicate. Increased spotlight can magnify internal tensions.
It can reshape media dynamics.
It can shift public narratives quickly.
But growth rarely happens without tension.
If anything, this debate underscores the WNBA's arrival into a broader national conversation.
Controversy signals visibility.
Visibility signals relevance. And relevance signals strength. The fact that Clark's style can ignite this level of discourse proves that the league is no longer operating on the margins of mainstream sports coverage.
That context matters.
Eisen's argument ultimately lands on a simple but powerful principle. Respect for basketball is demonstrated through commitment, competitiveness, and excellence.
Clark embodies all three. She trains relentlessly. She competes fiercely. She produces consistently.
Discomfort with her style doesn't negate her dedication.
And here's the final layer: influence. Young players are watching. They see the range. They see the confidence. They see the freedom to play without shrinking.
Whether critics approve or not, Clark's style is already influencing the next wave. Courts across the country now feature kids practicing deeper threes. That imitation isn't disrespect, it's inspiration. As Part 5 closes, the lines are clearer. On one side are those who equate respect with tradition and restraint. On the other are those who see respect as fearless expression within the boundaries of competition.
Neither perspective is inherently malicious.
But only one aligns with the sport's historical trajectory of evolution.
Rich Eisen didn't just defend Caitlin Clark. He defended basketball's capacity to grow. And perhaps that's the lasting takeaway.
This isn't a temporary headline cycle. It's a generational pivot point. The game is expanding in pace, personality, and reach. Clark happens to be one of the most visible faces of that expansion.
The debate will continue. Critics will critique. Supporters will support.
But as arenas stay full and the conversation stays loud, one truth becomes harder to deny. Caitlin Clark isn't disrespecting basketball.
She's forcing it into its next chapter. Now we want to hear from you.
After everything Rich Eisen said and after breaking down the full debate surrounding Caitlin Clark, where do you stand? Is her style pushing the game forward? Or do you think critics have a point? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let's have a real conversation about the future of basketball. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to hit that like button so more fans can join the discussion. Subscribe to the channel for more breaking sports reactions, analysis, and updates as this story continues to unfold. And don't forget to turn on notifications, because in today's sports world, narratives change fast, and you won't want to miss what happens next.